Welcome back to the Literacy Lunch Break. We are excited to continue to talk about literacy wins. Today's episode, we will talk about literacy wins in the classroom and in the district. We have Shelia Cooper joining us. She is an ELA coordinator for Hillsborough School District. Thank you so much for joining us today, Shelia.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
We would love to get started by having you share just a little background about your experience in education and what led you into leadership and literacy.
Oh, thanks so much, Marjorie. I'm always happy to talk about myself. So I've been in education for 35 years. I started as a 4th, 5th, and 6th grade teacher. I did that for 15 years, obviously not all grades at the same time. I rotated between those grades. And then I moved into being an instructional coach. Started out the first year for math and literacy, and then the remaining 6 years just did literacy. And that's really what began to ignite my interest in a leadership role at the district level. Shortly after starting this, my then administrator really encouraged me to seek leadership roles. And so I attended a program called NJ Excel, and I got my certificate to be a principal, a supervisor, and ultimately a chief school administrator for a district. And landed my job here in Hillsborough 14 years ago. I am the K-12 English Language Arts Supervisor, and what I really like about that role is I see the kids at the start of their educational career, and I see them at the end of their educational career. And when I was in my leadership program, I think one of the things that made me different from the other people in my cohort is many of them wanted to be building administrators. And they couldn't understand why I wanted to do curriculum. And I said, because curriculum, the decisions I make potentially impact all of the students. And I love seeing that journey of students when they're 5, just learning their letters and learning how to read, and then going into a senior English class and really listening to these students analyze and speak to the text that they're reading. And really, some of the work they do, I'm not sure I could have done when I was their age. It's just really fascinating. And some days I do both of those. I'll be in a kindergarten class in the morning, and then I'll go to a senior English class in the afternoon. And it's just incredible to see kids on that whole journey and everything in between.
I love that because K-12, that's big, right? And so I think often when you hear someone that's leading and making decisions about curriculum, it's like K-12, that's way too big, that's way too much. But I love your perspective of that actually helps me set that journey and make sure that that continuum is cohesive, that you're building the foundations that continue to get built upon. So absolutely love that perspective and that desire to really make an impact. And of course, we can make an impact whether we're in the classroom, a building admin, or at the district level, but our roles do play, our roles are different depending on where we're living. So I am a little bit interested in the math and literacy. So you were doing both, which is quite amazing because I'm always like, I am a literacy person. If it's a math problem, no, thank you. So what led you, to decide literacy was really where you wanted to focus?
Well, literacy is always where I wanted to
Yeah.
focus. My personal master's degree is not in leadership; it is in reading,
Okay.
and I am a certified reading specialist as well. At that time, the district chose to have this program be, at least for the first year I did the program, where you were the math and literacy trainer for one building. Then they spaced us out, and some of us there were 3 of us, so we handled the 6 elementary schools for literacy, and then there were 3 math who handled. Eventually, it came to where every building in that district had a literacy coach, a math coach. There was a technology coach for the district, and then there was also a special education coach. So it was a district that really made use of this idea of embedded professional development and support for teachers. Currently, where I am now in Hillsborough, we don't have that, although I do have reading specialists, and then there are writing specialists, and there are math specialists at each of the elementary schools, the intermediate school, and the middle school. And those teachers are integral to the success of our program. As we said earlier, I'm K-12. I cannot get to every single building, every single teacher, every single
Right.
day. And so I depend on these teachers to really help me. They do some of the training, not on new materials, but on when we have a new staff, they will bring them up to speed on
Mhm.
the programs and the materials we have. They help me to just disseminate messages. It's very challenging to send an email to 200 teachers. So I can send
Right.
the email to the school, and then the principal and the content specialist will make sure the right teachers get it.
Mhm.
But the first year when I was that dual literacy and math, I found myself at Barnes and Nobles or wherever on a Sunday afternoon looking at math books, like
Yeah.
really looking at the teaching of math, and how do you enhance that practice. And the good thing is, good teaching is good teaching,
Yeah.
whether it's math or it's literacy. Um, I just always found it a little bit easier to support the literacy
Mhm.
than the math.
Yeah, that definitely will agree with you there. Very similar. You and I have very similar stories where I started as a sixth grade teacher, moved into literacy coaching, and then I stopped at the building admin level before I came to Hegarty. But
Oh,
that
how
same,
awesome!
yeah, but that same desire really too. And that's as we, moved in, as I moved to Hegarty, I was like, well, this is my opportunity to make that larger impact, which I think
Yeah.
is exactly what you're sharing is that desire to ensure that it's not, just one classroom or one school, but that we can make this impact across the district,
Hmm.
across the state, and eventually, hopefully we're seeing this impact really happen across the nation.
That
And
would be great.
so that's why I love this series so much is because we know there's a lot of changes, there's a lot of shifts, there's a lot of legislation coming out, and administrators and district leaders and teachers, even parents can feel a lot of different ways about all of the changes that are happening. And I think it's important that we stop and we recognize what those wins are, right? And
Hmm.
and recognize, as we're making these changes, that we're checking in, that we're making sure that these changes are, showing an impact. And so I would love for you to share about a district win that you had where you were able to identify that student impact, and
Hmm.
how you've already shared a little bit about how you can lean on specialists and support, but
Hmm.
really how that happened within your district. We'd love for you to share that win.
Sure. So, in terms of student impact right now, the first is going to be more anecdotal in that when I go into classrooms and I'm observing teachers, particularly, I'm really trying to get into as many of the classrooms during their Hegarty time. Um, what I see is a classroom where all of the students are engaged.
Yeah.
They're participating. I was in a class the end of last week, a first grade class, and it's a newish teacher to us. I believe it was only her second year with us. And of course, she doesn't really know me yet. She's not been here that long. So she was a little nervous. Um, but I walked in and saw a Hegarty lesson from soup to nuts. I saw the whole thing. It was pretty darn flawless. I mean,
That's
it
amazing.
just looked like she's been doing this forever. And, I said something to her on the way out to that effect. I said, "You made this look really effortless." And she said, "Wow, I was really nervous. This is hard compared to what they had done last year." And part of me wanted to say, okay, but it was really good. The
Yes.
kids were engaged. So, she had all the pieces. The kids, she had to go deal with a student needing a band-aid, and so she had the kids do a turn and talk about a pattern with the words they were working on, name words that go with this
Yeah.
pattern. And with first graders, that's not always easy to
Right.
have them, she's 5 feet away getting a band-aid, but
Hmm.
they were there and they were naming words. So for me,
Yeah.
that, again, I know it's anecdotal, but to see a classroom of 20 first graders really engaged during all this, and they were, when they went back to their seats and they were working with their whiteboards and writing the words and trying to beat the student up at the board who's writing it. It was amazing. Now, as great as the anecdotal ones are, we also want to see it in test scores. We've
Right.
not yet done our universal screener. That actually starts next week, and that's where I'm really hoping to see some differences in terms of how prepared are our first, second, and third grade, or kindergarten first and second graders. But I did look at some data from, we do another benchmark through Linkit, and this is more a reading comprehension one. So obviously we don't do it with kindergartners, but I took a look at the second grade scores, and I really looked at Form A, which we did in September,
Hmm.
and Form B, which we did at the beginning of January. And I'm really trying to look at um, what are the percent changes. You know, this is our fourth year doing this particular benchmark. And so I have a pretty good sense that typically the scores in Form A are higher because it's easier to show grade level expectations than it is
Right.
in the middle of the year when
Right.
it gets harder. So what I did find is that the percent of students for our second grade across the district who scored in the exceeding, meeting, or this bubble range, which is technically meeting, we actually had 58.3% of our student body of second grade in that range. In September, we had 55.9%. So it's a small change. And what that tells me is that some of our students are more confident in their foundational literacy skills, their decoding, that they could go back and read, because this is a reading test. It's not read to them, they read it themselves. And so we are seeing that little bit of growth. And I'm going to, say that part of the reason is they are more confident decoders because of this work that they've been doing. And then next week, when we do our universal screener, fingers crossed, it tells me.
Yes. And I love that you talked about comprehension because, we sometimes we're so focused on foundational skills. And then there's been a little bit of pushback about, oh, it's not just phonics. And it absolutely isn't. But,
Right.
what we do know, I think it was Anita Archer or Louisa Moats. I'm not sure exactly who said it, but maybe Marilyn Adams. Goodness, I don't know. But it's just the point is there's no comprehension strategy that's
Right.
going to overcome the lack of decoding, right? Like
Right.
if we're not decoding, if our students aren't fluent, if they're not automatic, their brain's not going to be freed up to actually comprehend. So there is that connection. And
Right.
so, yeah, we have to build that foundation. And that's what's nice about being able to look at K 12 of recognizing we're putting some more emphasis here on foundational skills so we can have this cohesive, continuum of moving it on so students understand and comprehend what they read. Something
Exactly.
else that you said that I really stood out to me is that the teacher said, this is harder than last year,
Yeah.
and I think that's important to lean into for both teachers and for students, right?
Hmm.
Sometimes we forget the importance of that productive struggle, right? We don't want it to be
Hmm.
so challenging that we just cannot reach those goals. But we want students to lean into the hard work of decoding and understand that we're mapping our brains to do something that they're not designed to do, right?
Exactly.
This is exciting work, but it's also really, really hard. And the more we practice, the better we get at it.
Right.
And so the fact that students were engaged, even though something may have been a little bit trickier, a little bit harder, the fact that the teacher was able to take that lesson and really have it flow and make it look like she's, always taught it, even though
Yeah.
it was hard, I think, is a great success. And that anecdotal data matters too, right? We do. We want
Hmm.
the numbers, but we need students in that learning environment is such an impactful piece of learning. You could have the best curriculum in the world or all of the knowledge built into this, but if our
Hmm.
students aren't engaged, it doesn't really matter what we're trying to teach them if they're not
Right.
listening.
Right.
Um, so I think that's what leads me into the next question because it sounds like this learning environment was excellent in this one class, and
Really
hopefully that's
was.
something you're kind of seeing across the district. So as we think about the importance of building learning environments for both, our teachers, our educators, as well
Hmm.
as students, kind of leaning more to that classroom and student piece, Is there anything that you can kind of identify or call out where you're recognizing teachers or as a district you're doing to create those learning environments where
Mhm.
students can be confident in taking those risks or doing something that's a little bit harder?
I think the best way to do that is to encourage and foster that same sense in the teachers, to be brave, to try something new. And when we started with Hegarty, we had been with a different phonics program longer than I had been in this position. They've been using it for a very long time. So there's a lot to to be said about being in a place of comfort. Um, but sometimes when you're in that place of comfort, you unintentionally cut corners. You've made it so automatic that you're almost doing it on autopilot, and um, that's not always great. We are a fairly high performing district. We do get good results. Our students do learn to read, um, but one of the things we are combating against is we have a half day kindergarten program still, and that is like hard to believe. And our kindergarten teachers are amazing. Our first grade teachers are amazing. The students in those classes, work hard, but we're almost against a little bit of a uphill battle when we get to first grade because we just didn't have the time in kindergarten. And so part of making the decision to select this program was to have something that builds up more to support them, but reminding teachers that it's okay. You don't have to be perfect at this right now. And so we had a couple exchanges. I met with a couple of teachers. I asked teachers for feedback. They, thankfully are comfortable to reach out to me, and they'll say, Sheila, this isn't working right now. This pace is too fast. And so I met with the specialists. I talk through a couple of things. I went and talked to a couple of teachers who had reached out to me. I said, "Let me come and see. Let me see what you're talking about." And then we worked out a pace that felt more comfortable. Still got the work done. I wasn't letting like, no, we have to do this, but I was able to work with them um, to come up with a pace that allowed them to do the pieces of the program, but in a way that wasn't so fast, because the whole idea is mastery. It's not just getting through the units. I actually want the students to master it. And so I think encouraging the teachers to try something, but then also being open when they say, Sheila, this isn't working quite right. What can we do? And all of us working together, because that's what educational teams are. We are working together for the same goal of helping our students, in this case, become flexible, fluent readers and eventually writers. And so I think for us, um, support from me, but also they're giving me support in making some of these decisions, and then working together to work through some of these initial bumpy things. Because honestly, when the teachers get comfortable with this, it will speed up, and then we will be able to fit it in. But mastery is still our goal. And so if it takes a little more time, I'm okay with it because I want the kids to master it.
Well, and I love that because that that's what has to happen across all districts, right? Is we have to be
Right.
responsive to the classrooms we have in front of us, the students we have in front of us, right? So, I
Mm-hmm.
always say like a curriculum can only go so far because every classroom, every district, they look different. So a half
Yeah.
day kindergarten and then moving into first grade is going to look different than a full day kindergarten, or
Right.
perhaps a district that had students go to pre-K and a district that didn't. And so
Right.
how do we adjust and meet the needs? And that follows the same model for our classrooms, right? So how do
Right.
we build that community and that comfort of taking risks in the classroom is being willing to adjust and to reflect and refine. And I really love how you shared, yeah, sometimes when you're in the same curriculum for so many years and nothing changes,
Right.
you don't think about being reflective or adjusting, or because you're just on that autopilot. So
Right.
yeah, definitely. Well, I always like to end our podcast with just a takeaway. So if you have anyone listening about these literacy wins and your journey, and maybe they're just starting to kind of branch
Mhm.
out, make some changes, is there any piece of advice, the one piece of advice that you'd want them to walk away with?
Oh gosh.
I know that's a hard question.
It is, because simply with everything when we're working with kids in an educational setting, the first thing always is, we want to keep them, we want to keep our students in front of us, like in our mind's eye as we're making these decisions, and to block out the noise of people who are afraid to make changes, or listening to the version of gossip in the world of education, who are saying negative things about XYZ, that really it's keeping those, however many hundreds of kids are in your district, keep them in front of you, because while we well, we're not going to damage them necessarily. We want to keep in the mind's eye what our goal is, and that is to help them learn to become, as I said, flexible readers and writers. And in my case, math supervisor wants them to be flexible mathematicians. We want our students to um, gain everything they can so that they can get their education and go on and do wonderful things in the world. And so I really do try to keep the students centered in front of me, and then the teachers centered around them, because I am very cognizant of the teachers. Teaching is hard, and I want to make sure that we're active partners. And so I think that it's a very long-winded way of saying, just keep your people in front of you as you're making these decisions, and then making those decisions will become easier if you do your research.
I love that. That was excellent. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us today. We really
Thank you
appreciate
so
it.
much. This was great. I appreciate it.
Be sure to subscribe and stay tuned for our upcoming episodes where we explore literacy topics in a snack-sized, easily digestible format.